Your life as a gravedigger. During the plague, you stopped counting bodies. You did not choose this work. The work found you when everyone else stepped back. At first, you tried to remember names. You told yourself it mattered, that each body deserved to be recognized even briefly before being lowered into the ground. You believed that remembering was a form of respect. You stopped after the third day. There were too many, too fast, too close together. Names blurred into faces, faces into weight, weight into routine. The first body you buried belonged to someone you knew. You recognized the boots before the face. You had spoken to him 2 days earlier. He had complained about the smell in the streets. He had laughed when someone mentioned sickness. You did not laugh. You lowered him carefully. Not because anyone was watching, but because your hands still remembered what care felt like. That memory did not last. Soon, bodies arrived without warning, without preparation, wrapped in cloth or not wrapped at all. Some were stiff, some were not. You learned the difference quickly. You learned how long a body takes to change. You learned what death smells like after one night. After two, after being left in a room too long, people stopped bringing the dead themselves. They left them at designated places, doorways, corners, wagons. They avoided eye contact when you approached, as if death could jump from your hands to theirs. They needed you. They did not want you near. You worked from morning until your arms shook. The ground resisted less as you dug more graves. Soil became loose, familiar, easier to open. You stopped marking places carefully, not out of disrespect, out of necessity. There were not enough markers, not enough time, not enough space. You told yourself the ground would remember. Children were the hardest at first. Their bodies were lighter. That should have made it easier. It did not. You held them differently, without thinking. Something in your arms remembered what the world had forgotten. Eventually, even that changed. You learned not to pause. Pausing made things real. You ate little, not because food was scarce, but because your hands never felt clean enough. The smell followed you, into your clothes, into your sleep, into your mouth when you tried to eat. You washed anyway, again and again. Water turned dark, skin cracked, the smell stayed. People began to avoid the path you took home. Children were pulled away when you passed. Conversation stopped. You were not blamed, but you were associated. You carried the proof. One evening, a woman followed you to the edge of the burial ground. She did not come closer. She held a bundle in her arms, small, too small. She did not cry. Crying required energy. She asked you where to put it. You pointed. She placed the bundle down and stepped back immediately, as if distance could undo what had already happened. She did not stay to watch. You did. That night, you did not sleep. Not because of grief, but because your body was still moving, still digging, still lowering weight into darkness. You realized then that something essential had shifted. Death was no longer an event. It was a process, and you were part of it. By the end of the week, you no longer tried to estimate how many you had buried. Counting implied an end. There was none. You sharpened your shovel by habit. You checked your hands for blisters and kept going. Pain meant you were still functional. Functional was enough. You stood at the edge of a fresh grave and understood something clearly. You were no longer a person who lived among the dead. You were someone whose life now existed because the dead needed a place to go. And tomorrow, they would need you again. People stopped saying your name. Not out of cruelty, out of distance. Names create closeness. Closeness felt dangerous now. They spoke to you indirectly, pointed instead of calling, left instructions without approaching. When they had to speak, they kept it brief, practical, as if emotion might contaminate them. You understood. Fear changes how people arrange space. They still needed you, every day, more than ever. But need does not create respect. It creates avoidance. You were useful, and usefulness placed you outside ordinary human interaction. You worked alone most of the time. When others helped, they stood far back. They handed you tools without touching your hands. They turned away when you lifted bodies. You noticed how quickly they stepped back afterward, as if the act itself was contagious. You stopped taking offense. Offense requires belief that you are still part of the same group. You were not. You had crossed into a role no one wanted to imagine themselves in. At night, you heard people pray that they would never need you. During the day, they prayed that you would arrive quickly. You became a contradiction they could not resolve. The burial ground expanded, not ceremonially, practically. You dug where the soil allowed. You buried where space remained. Order dissolved into efficiency. You stopped separating families. There was no time, no record. No one asked anymore. They only asked how fast. Your hands hardened. The blisters turned into calluses. Pain dulled into pressure. Your body adapted the way bodies always do when survival depends on repetition. Your mind adapted too. You noticed that you no longer flinched when lifting faces you recognized. Recognition slowed you down. Slowness was dangerous. You trained yourself to look at weight instead of identity. This frightened you, briefly. Then it became normal. One afternoon, someone offered to take over your work. Not out of kindness, out of desperation. They lasted half an hour. They vomited behind a wall. They did not return. You did not comment. You had learned that not everyone could carry this role, and those who could would not volunteer. You were not brave. You were available. That distinction followed you everywhere. People began leaving small offerings near the burial ground. Food, cloth, sometimes coins. They did not give them to you directly. They left them where you would find them later. Gratitude at a distance. You accepted it, not because it felt good, but because refusing would draw attention. Attention was exhausting. You noticed that children watched you differently, not with fear, with curiosity. They had not yet learned what you represented. Parents pulled them away quickly. They did not want children to imagine that work like yours was possible. Possible meant real. One evening, you were asked to bury someone before nightfall. Urgently, quietly, no explanation. You did not ask for one. The body was heavier than usual, stiff. You recognized the clothing, someone important, someone people would normally mourn publicly. There was no ceremony, no witnesses, only speed. You realized then that plague did not only take the weak, it took structure, order, honesty. You lowered the body without comment. When you finished, the people who brought it were already gone. You stood alone, shovel in hand, understanding something new. You were not just burying the dead. You were burying what people did not want to face, and they would keep sending it to you. There was a moment when you realized you had stopped bracing yourself. At first, every body required preparation. A pause. A breath held longer than necessary. A silent adjustment inside you before lifting the weight. But one morning, you noticed that you no longer paused. Your hands moved before your thoughts did. Routine had replaced reaction. You dug without measuring time. Morning and evening blurred together. Shadows lengthened and shortened without meaning. The rhythm of your work dictated the day more than the sun ever did. Dig. Lower. Cover. Move on. You no longer marked graves with care. Not because you did not care, but because caring had become impossible to sustain. Memory had a limit. You had reached it. The ground itself began to feel different, softer, less resistant, as if it had accepted what was happening faster than people had. You wondered whether the earth felt relief at being useful. You stopped wondering quickly. Wondering slowed you down. You noticed changes in yourself that you did not discuss with anyone. You no longer recoiled at touch. You no longer felt urgency when voices rose nearby. Panic had lost its effect on you. It belonged to others now. You had moved past it. People spoke differently around you, quieter, more careful, as if loud sound might remind you of what you carried. They avoided your eyes. Eye contact implied connection. Connection implied obligation. You were not owed anything. You heard rumors about yourself, that you had grown cold, that you felt nothing, that you were no longer fully human. You did not correct them. Correction would require explanation. Explanation would require emotion. You could not afford either. One day, you recognized your own reflection in a piece of broken metal. Your face looked older than it should have. Not aged, thinned, as if something inside had been removed gradually, layer by layer, until only function remained. You did not look away. You accepted it. Children stopped crying when they saw you, not because they trusted you, but because they learned early what you meant. Silence followed you now. Not awkward silence. respectful silence. The kind reserved for things that cannot be argued with. You carried death with familiarity. It stopped asking anything of you. Sometimes you wondered how many people were left. The thought came uninvited. You pushed it away. Counting the living felt dangerous now. It suggested an ending. Endings were not part of your work. You were asked once how long you thought this would last. You did not answer. Answers create expectations. Expectations create disappointment. Instead, you picked up your shovel and kept working. That was answer enough. You realized that you no longer imagined a life beyond this, not because you believed it impossible, but because imagining required distance. And you lived too close to what was happening. Distance was gone. You had become something specific, necessary, temporary, replaceable, all at once. And yet, there you were, still digging. The plague did not end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Deaths became less frequent, not rare, just spaced farther apart. Enough time between them for people to start hoping again. Hope returned cautiously, like something that had been burned before and learned not to get too close. You noticed the change before anyone said it aloud. The wagons came less often. The piles grew smaller. You found yourself standing still more frequently, shovel resting in the ground, waiting. Waiting felt wrong. Your body had learned movement as a necessity. Stillness left space for things you had been avoiding. Thoughts, images, faces that no longer needed to be buried immediately. You worked anyway. You repaired tools that did not need repairing. You straightened markers no one would read. You filled depressions where the ground had settled unevenly. You stayed busy because busyness was safer than memory. People began returning to places they had abandoned. Doors opened again. Voices grew louder. Laughter appeared, briefly, uncertainly. The town tried to remember itself. They did not ask you to help with that. They avoided the burial ground now, as if it was something shameful, something better left behind. They spoke of rebuilding, of renewal, of moving forward. Moving forward did not include you. You realized that your usefulness had an expiration date. One morning, no bodies arrived. You waited. You sharpened your shovel. You waited longer. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than the days when death was constant. Constant death had given you purpose. This silence offered none. You understood then that the work had not only changed you, it had replaced something you did not know how to recover. You tried to imagine doing something else, anything else. The thought felt distant, abstract, like imagining a life that belonged to someone else. People passed you on the road now without stepping aside, without fear, without gratitude. They nodded politely, briefly, as if you were just another worker who had completed a task. Completion felt like erasure. At night, you dreamed of digging even when your body rested. Your hands moved in your sleep. Your shoulders ached as if still carrying weight. You woke up exhausted, unsure whether you had ever stopped. You went back to the burial ground one last time when the earth had begun to harden again. Grass was already pushing through in places. The ground was trying to forget. You stood there longer than necessary. You realized something then. The dead would be remembered as victims. The survivors would be remembered as resilient. You would not be remembered at all. You were the one who made forgetting possible. You turned away and walked back toward the town. No one followed. No one stopped you. No one asked what came next. That was fine. You had learned how to live without being asked. You had stood where no one wanted to stand. You had done what no one wanted to do. And when it was over, you stepped aside quietly. Somewhere behind you, the ground settled one last time. You kept walking.